Lando Norris currently has an opportunity of winning a World Drivers' Championship for the first time ever this year. No one would have thought that at the start of the season, but here we are with McLaren arguably being the best team on the grid as we head into the Azerbaijan Grand Prix in Baku. There is 62 points between him and Max Verstappen, and he has an outside chance of winning that World Drivers' Championship. But there is an area of Lando's driving that has come under intense scrutiny and could cost him the opportunity of winning this World Drivers' Championship, and that is his race starts. He has been on pole position 4 times this year and has failed to lead at the end of the first lap every single time he's been on pole. Actually, he's been on pole a total of 7 times in his F1 career and has failed to lead at the end of the first lap every single time. He is being called a bottler online. So I'm asking the question, is that term valid? Does Lando have some sort of mental block at the start of races? Or is there more to it? Let's have a look back at the 7 times he's been on pole position and what actually caused him to not be leading at the end of the first lap. Because it can't be his own fault every single time, can it? So Lando's first pole position came at Sochi in 2021, a great lap by the young Englishman in the McLaren, but was most definitely not the fastest car on the grid. However, pole position at Sochi is probably the one circuit where it's the worst place to start. Because of the long run down into turn 1, the car starting on pole position is punching a hole in the air for everyone behind them. The conversion rate of leading down after turn 1 from pole position has always been very low at the circuit, and that was the case this time around because Lando actually got a very good start. He was a couple of car lengths ahead of those behind him, and well, as we just mentioned, because of how long that run was down into turn 1, Lando could do absolutely nothing to fight off the slipstream behind him, which Carlos Sainz took full advantage of and drove around the outside of Lando into turn 1. And with that, Lando lost first place in the matter of a couple of corners. But I don't think there's more that Lando could do. He didn't have the pace advantage in the McLaren over the Ferrari at the start of the race, and with that massive slipstream that we so often see in Sochi, the Ferrari always was in the ascendancy. Lando defended the inside line as best as he could, tried to make it as difficult as he could for Carlos Sainz, but even the best drivers in the world cannot defend the indefensible. Lando's next pole position came 2 years later at Interlagos in the sprint race. He lined up alongside arguably the most dominant package in F1 history in the form of Max Verstappen and the RB19 car. Lando got a decent getaway, but it wasn't as good as Max in that Red Bull car. It wasn't long before Max Verstappen got the front wing of his Red Bull alongside the rear wheel of Lando's McLaren. And even on the tighter, shallower line, Max Verstappen was able to outbrake Lando into turn 1, take P1, and then defend that position down into turn 4. Now, could Lando have done any more with his initial launch and getaway? I personally don't think so. It was a decent one. I think it was more so the pace advantage or the performance advantage that the Red Bull had in 2023. As mentioned, it was arguably the most dominant package that we have seen in F1 history, and we saw that Red Bull just eat the gaps to cars alive, even when starting out of position. Lando Norris, however, could have done more to defend the position from Max Verstappen into turn 1, in my opinion. I think there was a little bit too much respect and room given by Lando, which allowed Max Verstappen to brake so much later and take the position on Lando into turn 1. Because Lando was leading into that initial braking zone, and that was where the confidence of Max in that Red Bull package shined through. What Lando should have done is he should have squeezed Max Verstappen, as we have seen Verstappen do numerous times to his opponents when he's had a subpar getaway. What he should have done is left Max Verstappen the most tightest angle possible to break into that turn 1 to ensure that Lando got the more optimal getaway through the first corner. This would have meant that he at least would have led through the S's and potentially into turn 4, giving himself the best opportunity to lead at the end of the first lap. Of course, it's easier said than done. Perhaps there was a lack of experience from Lando in that scenario. That's the first time he had been on pole position in 2 years since Sochi in 2021, whereas Max has had numerous experiences of starting from pole position in the previous 3 years prior to this. What is interesting is that Lando, while he could have been more aggressive here, he did learn from this and implemented it in a later pole position in Barcelona. However, Barcelona wasn't Lando's next pole position. His next one came at Shanghai Circuit in China for the Chinese Grand Prix weekend. He set a great lap in tricky conditions on the Friday to stick it on pole and line up alongside Lewis Hamilton. Unfortunately for Lando, he had a poor getaway and allowed Lewis Hamilton to get alongside him as they made their way into turn 1. He tried to hang it around the outside and defend the position from Lewis Hamilton, of course, once again not wanting to lose first place. But the nature of the first sector and the first couple of corners at the Shanghai circuit means that if you're on the outside of turn 1, it will mean that you're on the inside for turn 2. So there is some thinking here behind Lando's defensive moves. However, what Lewis Hamilton has cleverly done in his experience of racing many a year at the Shanghai circuit, he forced Lando onto the dirty side of the circuit. So that meant that Lando, on cold tyres at the start of the race, lost grip and unfortunately dropped back all the way to 8th position. It was a valiant defence by Lando Norris, but potentially, once again, a bit of inexperience showing from Lando at this circuit, and maybe even racing Lewis Hamilton for the first time at the start of a race. But Lando found himself in this position primarily due to his poor getaway. Was this driver error, or is there something more to it? This is a theme that continued to occur throughout the course of this 2024 season. Lando Norris's next pole position came at Barcelona. The McLaren has closed the performance gap on the Red Bull car, and Lando now has his first win in Miami. Lando gets away off the line, but Max Verstappen has a better getaway once again, similar to Interlagos, and is very quickly alongside Lando. Lando, however, learns from his mistake of not defending aggressively enough in Interlagos and squeezes Max Verstappen. But he squeezes Max Verstappen too much so that Max actually has to take avoiding action and dip 2 wheels onto the grass. But Max being Max keeps his foot in it and stays alongside Lando Norris all the way down the run to turn 1. What this allowed the drivers to do behind is take full advantage of the hole in the air that the McLaren and the Red Bull were punching ahead for them. And that allowed George Russell in P4, nonetheless, to drive around the outside of the Red Bull of Max and the McLaren of Lando into P1 into the first corner, catching both by surprise. But particularly Lando, who, as they headed into the braking zone, he not only had to be careful of Max Verstappen on his inside, but a flying Mercedes on the outside, which didn't allow Lando to brake as late as he would have liked to defend from Max on the inside if it was just those two going side by side into that first corner. So Lando not only lost P1 into the first corner, but he lost P2 as well and found himself in P3. So the reason Lando lost those positions is most definitely due to the poor getaway. But is there something that Lando could have done to rectify that? Was it because he released the clutch too early and bogged down in the second phase, hold on to it too long? Or was there more to it, and was it an issue with the McLaren in itself? I'll admit, at the time I thought it was a mistake from Lando. However, it seems that it came to light that McLaren had a bit of an issue on their hands. While they were gaining performance on the Red Bull, they were starting to see a consistent bogging down in the second phase of their race starts. Not just from Lando Norris, but also from Oscar Piastri. Which brings us to Hungary, where Lando Norris has his next pole position. He lines up this time around alongside his teammate in Oscar Piastri, with Max Verstappen just behind in third place. The McLarens get away and Lando once again bogs down in the second phase, but also does Oscar. But Oscar not as bad as his teammate. But both McLarens lose considerable time to the cars behind, particularly Max Verstappen, who is able to get alongside the McLarens as they head down into turn 1. Lando once again finds himself 3 wide heading into the first corner, except this time around he's fully aware of it, unlike Barcelona, because he has Max on his outside and he has his teammate on his inside. Max thankfully bows out pretty early and keeps his foot in it and actually gets ahead of Lando, who gets a little bit pushed out by his teammate onto the AstroTurf, where Lando isn't able to get the full traction out of the corner. But Lando then drops back to third place and is very fortunate that Max Verstappen drove Hamilton to the outside of the corner, otherwise he could have ended up back in fourth. But Max, we know, because of that, in effect, illegal overtake, was forced to give the position back. Lando found himself back in second place, and we know how the race ended. But there was a lot of criticism on Lando once again. Could he have done more at the start? He bogged down at the start. It was his poor getaway. He bottled it. But did he? It was post-Hungary that few whispers started to circulate that McLaren actually have a mechanical issue with their car on race starts. Because this wasn't just Lando Norris having this issue, it was starting to appear in Oscar Piastri's race starts too. What are the chances that both of their drivers were having poor second phases of their race starts? It could be that there was something mechanical. And it was a few days later where McLaren did confirm this. In their official race report on their official website, they stated it wasn't the smoothest of starts to the race for Lando, though, as he experienced a small glitch finding second gear during his acceleration from pole. There was no further explanation from McLaren about this glitch, which potentially caused Lando's poor start. If we are to accept McLaren's explanation as truth, then this isn't Lando's fault, and most definitely isn't a bottle job in regards to his start in Hungary. And could this have been the reason why he had a poor start in Barcelona, and all the way back in his sprint race start in Shanghai? Potentially, and if so, there's not much that Lando could do if it was the cause of this glitch. But the question also is raised, would this glitch rear its ugly head again? Lando's 6th career pole position and his 4th of the 2024 season came at the Dutch Grand Prix at Zandvoort, a circuit where Max Verstappen has dominated since its reintroduction in 2021. However, McLaren over the course of the weekend clearly set themselves above the rest as the car to beat, and Lando put a staggering 0.3 of a second, the largest margin over Max Verstappen in qualifying all year, to put it on pole position. However, once again, Lando Norris bogged down at the start and allowed Max Verstappen to take the lead, and this was the 6th time in his career where Lando had been on pole position and not led at the end of the first lap. While Lando did go on to win the race and was comfortable in the end, his race start, rightfully so, was very critically analysed. However, there was something that everyone pointed out. Upon analysis, Oscar Piastri and Lando Norris had identical race starts. They both bogged down in the second phase and they both pulled away at the same speed, both losing a position at the race start, and that ultimately especially cost Oscar Piastri any additional positions, or a podium at least, in this race. Understandably, questions were being asked of McLaren. What is going on here? Andrea Stella came out once again and commented, I think it is actually more in the preparation of the tyres, but we were not in condition to maximise the grip. And in fact, Oscar and Lando had exactly the same start. Some other times it was more to do with the optimization of some other parameters, or some other times it was more in the execution. There are often more factors that you need to optimize in their entirety. This is the process, the review that we have gone through lately, so hopefully we've been able to now maximize all these factors and we can have a good takeoff from the grid. And this explanation from Andrea Stella has plenty of substance. The Pirelli tyres are very much known for not operating well if they're not in the right window. We have seen plenty of cases in qualifying throughout the course of this year where drivers have not had enough time to get the tyres into the right temperature window and they've had a very poor lap time. But it's very uncharacteristic of the driver and of the car that they're driving, and this is the reason why. Could it be that the reason for Lando's poor starts has been just purely due to poor lack of preparation of tyres? But whose fault would it be if this is the actual reason for Lando's poor starts? Where he's bogged down at least. Is it Lando's fault? The driver behind the control of the cars? Is he not doing enough tyre prep? Or is it McLaren miscalculating how much tyre prep they need and giving Lando the incorrect data? They have a wealth of data at their fingertips, and could it be that they're just not relaying that correctly to Lando, or they're completely miscalculating it, or Lando isn't actioning that data correctly? It could be a whole culmination of things if it is the tyre prep. But this isn't the only reason potentially why Lando has not led at the end of every single one of his pole position starts. And that brings us to Monza, the latest race where Lando started on pole position and the latest race currently that we have just had in the 2024 season. Lando, as you most likely know, started on pole position once again, pipping his teammate. He has an opportunity to capitalise on a massive points haul that he needs over Max Verstappen, who is starting down in 7th position. The two McLarens this time around get very good starts. Both of them do, making it down into turn 1 side by side, and Lando Norris leads out of the first chicane, the second corner, as they head round Curva Grande, the third corner, into the next chicane. Both McLarens have a sizable gap to Charles Leclerc, the eventual winner of this race, behind them already after the first chicane. However, Lando of course goes defensive from his teammate into turn 4, and Oscar Piastri pulls off one of the overtakes of the season around the outside of Lando Norris into the turn 4 chicane. Lando nearly makes contact with his teammate, has a bit of a tank swapper out of the exit of turn 4, and subsequently loses an additional position to Charles Leclerc, who is a little bit behind with that gap to the McLarens, and drives past Lando and overtakes him into the first Lesmo. So for the first time in 3 pole position starts, Lando has finally got off of the start line without bogging down in the second phase. But so has his teammate, and as we know, quite evidently they were given the green light to fight each other. Still a decision that baffles me when you've got one driver who is clearly favourite and a lot closer to winning the World Drivers' Championship than the other, especially in a race where your opponent in the lead for that championship is struggling down in 7th position, at the start of the race at least anyway. But the primary reason Lando didn't lead at the end of the first lap is because of his teammate, and an unbelievable overtake it was. However, I still believe Lando could have been more aggressive in his defence. Yes, it was on his teammate, and quite evidently he still feels that Oscar was a little bit too aggressive with his move round the outside. But he left the car's width, he left Lando room, and while you might think it's aggressive, he did it fairly and cleanly. Yes, it takes 2 to tango, and Lando states that if he braked later, he would have gone into the side of Oscar, but I think Lando there was being too cautious. He should have braked later. You could arguably say he was on the slightly dirtier line, but he's the one who is leading going into that corner. He brakes a bit earlier, Oscar outbrakes him, takes that advantage and that momentum around the outside and makes it stick. Lando, if he brakes later, and bearing in mind he's in the fight, the leading driver fighting for this World Drivers' Championship against Max Verstappen, even though it's your teammate, in respect, how dare he try that? That's the attitude you've got to have, and you've got to show Oscar Piastri that the door is completely shut. You've left it open for him, especially with the early braking that you had. While I'm not particularly a fan of the current racing rules, if you are ahead at the apex, the corner is yours, and you are entitled to drive the car on the outside attempting an overtake off of the circuit. The corner is yours. This is something Oscar Piastri did himself back in Miami against Carlos Sainz, using the racing rules to his advantage to cut off an overtake from Carlos Sainz around the outside. And Lando should have used the rules to his advantage and done that to his teammate. While his teammate might not have been happy, at the end of the day, you want to win the race. Break this unwanted run of not leading at the end of a pole position start and close down the championship lead on your title rival, maximising the points that are on offer. Basically, Lando needs to be a bit more of a dick. Oscar Piastri did nothing wrong in what he did in trying to overtake Lando, and effectively doing so because he was given the green light by the team to go racing. If they'd been instructed otherwise, then yeah, it's a dick move. But you don't win races sometimes if you don't make dick moves, as Sebastian Vettel will tell you. So Lando needs to act the same, especially if his team aren't going to prioritise him. There are discussions, supposedly, that they are now going to prioritise him, but a little bit too late, in my personal opinion. So Lando needs to take control of the situation himself, be more aggressive, and just deal potentially with the consequences later, like he probably should have done in Hungary by maintaining that position. So we've now analysed the 7 pole positions that Lando has in F1, and the question at the start was, is Lando a bottler? I don't think so. I'm still not going to call him a bottler and label him with that title. I do think that the number of pole positions, particularly of course this year where he's had 5 of them, I don't believe it's been solely down to him why he has had poor starts. And then it's always a losing battle, especially when he's found himself 3 wide into the first corner twice this year. That's very tricky, especially when you're in the middle. You're not even on the inside or the outside where you've got potentially a bit more control. But I do think Monza was definitely and hopefully a turning point for Lando. There was a lot of naivety there in regards to his teammate not expecting him to make a move such as that and him being too cautious at the start. He needs to be more aggressive. He needs to be more of a dick. He needs to channel his inner Verstappen. He needs to use the rules to his advantage because Lando is quick enough, as we've seen in qualifying and we've seen as a performance like at Zandvoort. He is quick enough to dominate the remainder of this season and not even need team orders for him to win this World Drivers' Championship if the Red Bull doesn't see a resurgence in its performance as it currently is, and it doesn't look like it. But that's what I'd like to see from Lando at the end of the year. Of course, he comes across as a well-mannered, nice lad. I like Lando. I'm a supporter of Lando. I want to see him win. But I do think there needs to be a change in mentality for him moving forward, and hopefully those race starts have sorted themselves out, as we saw a great one from both Oscar and Lando off of the line down into T1. As I said, that gap was quite sizable between the 2 McLarens as they headed into that second chicane, with Charles Leclerc the eventual winner behind them. So the McLarens definitely in the ascendancy, and this, to be fair, I still think with a 62-point gap is Lando Norris's championship to win, and it's all in his own hands. But let me know what you think of Lando Norris. Do you think he has the potential of winning this World Drivers' Championship this year? I mean, he has the potential, but do you think he's going to win it? And do you think he's a bottler? If so, let me know what you think in the comments below. I hope you like this video. If you want to see more of it, please hit that like and subscribe button, and we'll see you for the next one. Bye.